This week's episode of Weekly Takes is going to be dubbed the rock episode, but more importantly, it's going to be talking about nu metal in three different segments, of course. But this has been a subject that obviously is close to me, having grown up in the nu metal era and being a huge fan of some of the bands that, dominated the charts back then. But also in recent years, kind of seeing, not only in myself, but out there in the rest of the world and the rest of the market, a resurgence, at least in interest in the nu metal genre. So I think partly this is going to be fueled by, I was reading an article here that talked about social and political unrest of recent years. Whatever the motivations behind it, there is angst out there, just like there was for teens, and young adults in the early 2000s, the late 90s. It's got a little bit different theme to it, but the fact is it translated to the sound. There was a mixture of metal, of hip hop, and some other, a little bit of ambience. I feel like that was always a big thing in my opinion, especially with some of the ways the guitars were tuned. But either way, there was recently, it came out that nu metal was more popular in like online searches and just interest in general that was, able to be gauged than it has been in at least 20 years. Now, this has been a trend over the last year or so. There's new artists coming out that are deciding to perform in the nu metal style. And also you have, of course, I'm going to bring up Linkin Park. As I always say, if you know me, they're kind of everything to me when it comes to music. But in the last 3 years, Linkin Park has now twice put out 20th anniversary album collections. And these have been very successful, and they've not only reintroduced these albums like Hybrid Theory and Meteora back to the mainstream in a lot of ways, but they've also kind of fueled a wave of nostalgia. And for people that are in their late 20s, their early 30s, even their mid-late 30s, so on, nostalgia is a very powerful thing right now. You have these memories of times like the 90s and the early 2000s, where for you, times were just better, music was better, movies were better, and I know that there is sentiment involved in that, but there is actually a lot of objectivity that can be measured when it comes to these things as well. But that's not what this is about. So Linkin Park, for instance, releases these two, the Hybrid Theory 20th anniversary collection and the Meteora one. The difference with the Meteora one, both of them are absolutely fantastic. I own the Hybrid Theory, the full box set. It's beautiful from a historical perspective. And it brought back a ton of demos and mixtapes and unreleased tracks from their early era before they even became Hybrid Theory and then later Linkin Park. We're talking when they were a group called Zero. But Meteora did the same thing. I feel like there was actually even more content released, but the big thing there was we actually got 2 singles to hit the rock and alternative airwaves, with Lost being a huge hit for the band, and Fighting Myself also doing pretty well on the rock side of things. And if you have a band like Linkin Park coming back, people have always heard the name for the last 23, 24 years, and they put out 2 singles that are very successful, and they're, of course, nu metal, it does actually reintroduce that idea back into the mainstream rock atmosphere. And then you have some artists, there's this band, they're called Cinnamon Babe. They're a nu metal outfit. They don't have any qualms about like calling themselves nu metal, and they're led by model actress Stormy Maya. I don't know who this person is or what they do, except for I've watched some of the music videos. They're pretty good. I don't necessarily relate to everything that she wants to talk about, but that's fine. But the music is good. Her vocals are actually very good, and she's pretty hot too. So this is the kind of thing that will help. You start having these upstart bands that they either grew up or were influenced. She directly mentions Rage Against the Machine and Linkin Park. Like specifically, it's not like here's a mishmash of bands and then Linkin Park's in there, but you're talking about Rage Against the Machine, who was really big in like the kind of punk metal, scene back then, and then you have Linkin Park, which they were not the originators of the nu metal genre, but they did change it forever. So I think it's really cool to see some people that are finally coming around that were inspired by these bands and are doing their own thing and coming back to a genre 20 plus years later that really revolutionized the rock metal scene and brought metal back to the kind of the forefront after being dead for, the entirety of the 90s almost. And, oftentimes these bands, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, POD, Papa Roach, Korn, would make the actual top 40 stations because of how big this stuff was getting at the time. So anyways, I think it's really cool. I think nu metal definitely needs to make a resurgence. It was a great genre of music that sometimes is underappreciated, but I think that the more time goes on, the more we realize just how great it was. Next, I wanted to talk about Brad Delson and Rob Bourdon of Linkin Park, of course. This is the rock episode, and this is what I said I was going to talk about this week. We're talking nu metal, and I feel like when it comes to that genre and the rock metal genre of this era in particular, I feel like Brad Delson and Rob Bourdon do not get the credit they deserve, particularly within the rock community. I think a lot of people don't really pay enough attention to what they do and how good they actually are. Brad Delson, of course, being the lead guitarist of Linkin Park, and Rob Bourdon being the drummer. Both of these guys actually played together long before Linkin Park, and they had formed their own band, and then, of course, eventually met up with Mike Shinoda, and, the rest is history. So I think a lot of people, they hear Hybrid Theory, they hear Meteora, and then they hear, obviously, other later albums of Linkin Park's, Minutes to Midnight, Living Things, 1,000 Suns, etc., and oftentimes they're not really paying a lot of attention to the individual instruments that are occurring. Part of that is on purpose. Brad Delson specifically, basically he's always said that he didn't really like to be a show-off when it came to playing guitar. He did not want to necessarily stand out. He wanted to blend his sound in with the rest of the instruments. Essentially, the way they compose their music, it was supposed to be very fluid, very dynamic, and nothing, at least in the first couple albums, nothing was like supposed to drown out anything else. It was like a well-orchestrated, well-composed orchestra. But that doesn't mean if you don't pay attention, it's not there. Some of the best riffs of early 2000s metal, of the nu metal genre, are Linkin Park songs. You can think of Faint, you can think of A Place for My Head, Somewhere I Belong. Like some of these guitar riffs from these albums, and of course later albums as well, Minutes to Midnight, etc. Of course, it's the genre is very different now, and Linkin Park has basically changed genres. But at the time, those were like iconic guitar riffs. You can almost always recognize a Linkin Park song as soon as the guitar kicks in, or as soon as you hear Johan's mixing or turntables. So I don't think he gets enough credit, and especially later on with Minutes to Midnight, he did actually start doing some guitar solos, nothing major, but he started throwing them in there, and actually opened up more and more over time. There's some really great solos on the album The Hunting Party, which is like their heaviest album since probably Meteora. But overall, he's a very skilled musician. Besides guitar, they do a lot of things, but even as guitar, if you go watch their live performances, you can see he's very skilled. You can see what he's doing. And especially in later performances, there's a lot of additional things going on. I've been watching some performances of What I've Done from the last few years that they were touring, and they put this incredible solo in the middle of that song. Faint has always had a really good solo in their live performances. So I feel like they were a very composed band. They did very much produce their sound to sound fluid, to sound like one thing. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be like anybody necessarily stood out above anyone else. I think it's kind of unfair that he doesn't get the credit. Same for Rob Bourdon. Rob Bourdon, there's not a bunch of drum solos throughout their music. Again, they didn't have this tendency to show off. But the guy is an extremely technical drummer. When you watch their live performances really is, I feel like, where they shine. Over the years, Rob Bourdon's drum set just grows and grows and grows and grows. It becomes monstrous by 2017 because throughout all of their records, and applies to Delson and the entire band as well, throughout all of their records over the years, they constantly were shifting styles, shifting sounds, and taking on new musical roles. So there was always something new they would learn, something new they would introduce. And to be able to do that takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of technical mastery. And Rob Bourdon definitely has that. Now, he does do some pretty cool drum solos, and in one of the performances of What I've Done that I just mentioned, where Delson rips off a pretty awesome solo, there's actually some a pretty awesome drum solo going on as well. They're both kind of coinciding with each other, so I don't know if you would call it a solo, but they're great performances that stand out. And I just feel like these guys, again, don't get the credit they deserve. They put in so much work. Rob Bourdon at one point injured his back during the production of, I believe it was The Hunting Party, because he was for 7 days a week doing like 10 plus hours of drum rehearsals, and playing. So these guys were extremely committed to their craft, and they did a lot more that people think behind the scenes and in their live performances that really showed their technical prowess, and they should get the credit. Now, finally, in my posts earlier this week, I said that perhaps there was something that I had planned, and I can't necessarily guarantee anything at this moment, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I will say that I have wanted to play guitar ever since I was a kid. Ever since I was a teenager, it was something I enjoyed, listening to classic rock and 80s rock, and then, of course, later on, finding nu metal and Linkin Park. It's always been something that's been there, but I've never scratched the itch. There's been a lot of distractions along the way, life gets in the way, and other hobbies and such, but I've kind of gotten to this point where I need something that's a little bit more meaningful, that could stick around for me, something I can sit and enjoy in the quiet on the couch. I can just pick up a guitar and I can start playing, make some music, play something I know, literally just strum at it and listen to the sound. But also a big inspiration has been, as we've talked about, the resurgence of nu metal, not only in myself, but like I said, seeing it from some others that are stepping up and making this kind of music. I feel like, well, why can't I do that? I mean, there's no reason I can't, honestly, but why haven't I done that? And when can I do that are probably the better questions. So I've been binging a lot of live Linkin Park performances, as I mentioned in the previous segment. That's been a big thing for me. And just watching Brad Delson and Mike Shinoda, actually, just watching them play in front of a crowd and just having this great time and making something awesome, and just the energy that goes with that. Just being able to have that skill would be nice, to be able to accomplish that, even just for myself sitting alone in my room. But overall, this idea of music can die. Genres can pass away, and not only that, but the artistry of playing a certain type of instrument a certain way can go away. I listen to a lot of great newer rock and metal. I listen to a lot of great bands who have been around for 30 years that are still making great rock and metal, but you have to do the things that resonate with you. And again, that was, to me, was this specific sound, this specific genre. What it was these guys created in the late 90s, the early 2000s with nu metal, I think is, something special to me and many other people, not just my age, but obviously with newer, younger people as well. And I think it would be a shame to let that fall to the wayside. I think that there's this tendency to just kind of move on from things and let them fade to the past, and then people forget about it. I was watching a video by he's a music producer. I think it's Rick Beato. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I know it's Beato or Beto or whatever, Beato. But he's been somebody I've watched a little bit on YouTube, and he spoke about this, how many of these like really big artists or their estate or their record label, such as the Beatles. That was a big one that he mentioned, but also like Jimi Hendrix and some of these others. Nobody's like allowed to do anything with their music. Now I understand, like he even mentioned, I understand if I put your music or I sample your music or I play your music, even if you play it yourself on your own instrument, if I do that in a video, for instance, and publish it, I understand a copyright claim. It is yours. So you take whatever monetary gain there is from that, but at least let me make the video so I can teach other people about your sound or about your history, or just introduce people to what it was you are. Because what you're going to find is without that, you'll fade to obscurity. If people can't hear you, if people don't have access to you or access to learning, then you'll just fade away. And he brought out the fact that on Spotify, many of these artists that once had just massive total listeners have really plummeted over the years. And that's partly because it's their own doing. It's partly because they're so restrictive. They will block content, not just copyright claim it. They will outright block content or possibly strike it, I would assume, to protect their brand or whatever. But really what it is they're eliminating their brand. So I feel like it's really important that whenever you have the opportunity to keep a sound, to keep a genre, to keep a style alive, if you want younger people or new generations or broader audience to know what you did, then you need to make sure they can access it. So part of me says, as a Linkin Park fan, I don't know when or if they will ever return. I still think that's possible, and I encourage it. I think that the band can go on without a new singer and with Mike Shinoda leading the band along with the others. But in lieu of that, and even if that were to occur, I feel like there's kind of a duty on my part, if I can, to learn an instrument and learn that genre, learn what it was that they did that made such an impact on me, and hopefully in some small way share that with others. Thanks again for checking out Weekly Takes. If you enjoyed this minicast, please subscribe to the channel for more. Check out the playlist for past episodes. Leave a like, and if you have anything to say, any feedback, definitely leave a comment, and we'll see you next week.